Good evening, welcome to Spotlight. This evening we're delving into very academic spaces, looking at university education and academic freedom in relation to the African university. How free is academic freedom? Or how free are African universities? Now, university education, or higher education as most people call it, has evolved over the years. There have been many challenges and many changes that have taken place. And also with the advent of neoliberal politics, there's been commercialization of education. It's been marketized. And there's been eroding of the conventional and traditional understanding of higher education. The new order of neoliberal marketization of university education, some scholars believe, has threatened academic freedom and marginalized the vulnerable in our societies and their access to education. Now, Ghana is not an exception to all these transformations in higher education. They happen across the world. This evening on Spotlight, we're putting the spotlight on Ghana's higher education in the context of contemporary changes and how they have affected academic freedom as a prelude to the upcoming interdisciplinary forum aimed at bettering higher education in Ghana and Africa as a whole. Very timely conversation as education has been in the news a lot. We'll go for a quick break, and when we come back, Spotlight continues. This is a conversation you want to draw near to your television and pay attention to. We'll be right back.
Dreaming of a property for your home or workspace is one thing, but finding the property at the best locations with the most favorable condition and closing that deal is another. And that's why we are here. From Accra, Ghana, to Lagos, Nigeria, to Cape Town, South Africa, we are bringing you prime properties, affordable home solutions, and intriguing interviews with CEOs of various real estate companies and everything in between and on. My name is Kwesi Otten Desmond, and this is Property Take. Property Take, your gateway to Africa's real estate market. Showing this and every Wednesday, 7:30 p.m. on MX24.
Welcome back to Spotlight. Before the break, I mentioned we're looking at academic freedom and the African university, also focusing on contemporary issues in Ghana's higher education. I'm speaking with some very knowledgeable persons in studio with me. We are going to be speaking with Dr. Njiba Frehiwot, who's a research fellow at the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana. Also, we're speaking with Dr. Caesar Toure. He's a philosopher and health ethicist. Interesting. The first time I've come across a health ethicist. So it's about ethics in health. I'll be asking him to explain that. He's a senior lecturer at the Department of Philosophy and Classics at the University of Ghana. Also the ethics lead, or the for the MSc in International Health and Tropical Medicine, University of Oxford. In short, he's a big man. Also, we're speaking with Abdul Karim Ibrahim, who's a broadcast journalist and a final year MPhil candidate at the Institute of African Studies, University of Ghana. And I should mention that I'm also, I also went to the University of Ghana, but that was a cons department. So welcome to Spotlight. First, I want to understand what exactly do we mean when we say academic freedom, and if you could start with that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think academic freedom is a lot of things, but in short, it gives faculty, the administration, and students the ability to freely research, discuss, and teach what they believe is necessary, important, relevant during that time period in their course, right? So for example, I'm in the Institute of African Studies in the History and Politics section, and I teach in, I usually teach a Pan-Africanism class, a social movements class, and a class on development. So an academically free institution would allow me to create content and features for that class that I deem are relevant, are contemporary, and will help to contribute to knowledge production and transforming society. In an academically unfree space or university, faculty are dictated what they have to teach. Faculty perhaps speak out against particular political, economic, or social issues in society, and they are clamped down on. Faculty or students protest against conditions, and they are repressed. And which is what's even more sort of detrimental is in a space which is not academically free. Faculty and students and even universities are afraid to speak out against societal issues. And so, in essence, that's what academic freedom is. Really, the ability to use the academy to transform society and not be afraid that that transformation will find some sort of repression.
Okay, I'll come back to you with a few follow-ups. But Dr. Ture, if you can speak on the importance of why are we discussing academic freedom at this particular time? Why this moment?
Well, anyway, thanks. This topic has been in the air for a long time. And we are now at a very particular moment in history, not only in Ghana, but across academia in many countries, where there are certain forces that are actually exerting pressure on the universities or on academia. One is neoliberalism, where academia is now being transformed into a sort of commercial institution, and in our case in particular, in the low and middle income countries, into a sort of industrial production of graduates, which is undermining quality. And at the same time, people who live in academia find it difficult to be able to have the space, the freedom, and the time to be able to generate knowledge to the new problems that we are actually facing. You mentioned that I'm a health ethicist. I recently gave a conference saying, why did Africa not produce a COVID-19 vaccine when there are many brilliant African scientists? Anyway, that's just to give you an idea.
Actually, I was going to come to that later on in the program, because I wanted to find out why, if we're placing so much emphasis on academic freedom and education in Africa, why have we not seen any, we've not had any new inventions, we've not heard any unprecedented things coming from that side of our society. But I'll come back to you with that, so just marinate that and find your answers for us. Let me come back in studio here. Ibrahim, if you can just explain to us the issues that are being focused on. A lot of people say Ghana's educational institution is very outmoded, and there's so many amendments that need to be made, you know, right from primary school, high school, university. Do you even agree that the system is outdated and needs to be updated?
Well, yeah, I think generally there's a certain understanding and appreciation that the kind of output we're getting from our education system is not the best. And it's important to always do a certain comparative analysis of what we are experiencing here, what we are having here, and what may pertain in other parts of the world. So for instance, when Dr. Ture talks about the COVID-19 vaccine, and then you ask the question about why we are not able to produce vaccines, what you would realize is that the problem is not so much about the quality of the minds or the talents that we have on the continent, because we have seen many of our compatriots work in different places across the world, and they are able to do these things. So it's about the systems. And again, I am going to be talking about student relations with faculty members at the university and all of that. And for everybody who has been through, largely because of the relationship that is created between faculty members and then students. And so right from the very basic level, if you articulate, if you are very strong in your convictions as a student and all of that, it would appear in many instances, and also largely from a very cultural point of view, that you're too known, you are all over the place, and sometimes we need to whip you in line. And I think that all of those things account for the kind of problem that we have. The best of examples maybe would be employment or unemployment in our country. We always complain about that. And it's part of also the issues that are going to be discussed, because there's this neoliberal marketization of things. And so when it comes to knowledge production, if it doesn't lead to you getting a job in some big company, it is perceived to be a failure. But some of the things that the likes of Dr. Ture reflect on as bioethicists and all of those things are very important. They must help us govern our society, come up with new ideas and all of that. So quite clearly, our education system hasn't proven to be very good, and it is also steeped in that very same neocolonial orientation, and we need to change those kinds of things. And that's why this conversation is very, very important.
I like that you hit on the marketization aspect and people saying it has to lead to, you know, getting jobs or it's failed. But how appropriate is education if it's not connected to the job market? Or how much connection should there be between the education?
8 to 4 or a 9 to 5. We think about getting a check every month, but that's not a reality in Ghana. That's not a reality across the continent, number one. And number two, there are jobs in everything that we do. Farmers have jobs, right? Traders have jobs.
I have a job.
Right? You have a job, right? There are jobs everywhere, right? Musicians have jobs, right? Historians have jobs. I have a job, right? But I'm not in a 9 to 5 space, right? And so researchers have jobs, consultants have jobs, and so when we begin to ask ourselves, what, you know, should education train us to have jobs? I would say education should train us to transform society through work, right? Through our professional and our personal lives. And the reality is, everyone will have a job, because the society must run. As a matter of fact, women, housewives, have jobs.
Indeed. Yeah.
Mothers have jobs. Fathers have jobs, right? Grandmothers have jobs. Everyone has a job. But the problem with the education system, not just in Ghana, but globally, but since we're in Ghana, let's talk about Ghana, is that the education system is training youth or students to have jobs that do not exist, right? And the current push is for STEM, which I'm down with STEM. STEM is great because we certainly need technology to move us forward. But if you train, for example, 1 million students in STEM, but you don't have 1 million STEM jobs, what's the purpose of training 1 million students in STEM?
Then there's a misfit over
There's
there.
a serious misfit. And not only are we training students in STEM, we're not even using African-based STEM technology. We're using imported, Eurocentric, Western STEM technology, which is not going to work in this space, right? And so the question for me is, yes, education should lead to one being able to contribute to society through employment, right? But the question becomes, what is employment?
Right.
What is valuable employment? How does society value employment? For example, let's look at the Farmers' Day every year, right? Are people jubilating at the best farmer in Ghana? No, right? As a matter of fact, youth struggle to go into farming. Often youth that go into farming, it's because it cannot get a white collar job in where they think they should get a job. And as a matter of fact, I'm not putting down anyone who works in the bank, because we all need bankers, or anyone who works in corporate Ghana. But oftentimes what happens is some of these corporations, they take advantage of the fact that young people think that that's quality employment. So they bring in not full-time workers with health care, with some kind of benefits, with longevity. They bring you in as a contract.
Yeah.
And they pay you 6, 7, 800 CDs a month. Meanwhile, you can't even get to and from work with 5, 6, 8, 700 CDs, right? So how do we think about work is really important. And once we think differently about work, we'll begin to think differently about the content and features of education, and the two will match. Right now, they don't match.
Yeah.
The other critical question I wanted to ask is, to what extent is education free and fair? Can we even put the two together? If it's being free, should it be fair? Because if you're receiving, people say if you're receiving free education, you shouldn't be asking for too much. You should just take the basics that are coming to you, because it's a huge favor already. So beneath that question, we'll also have, is it a right or is it a privilege that I should have education? And in having that education, should it be as fair as it is free, or should it be just free? Dr. Njiba?
Yeah, I mean, I think, not I think. I think education is a human right.
Okay.
And so does the United Nations.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
And so education is a human right. Education should be free or affordable. It should be quality education. Everything that's free is not good. Somebody comes to you and says, you know what, I'm going to give you free housing. I'm excited about that. They come, they take you to some place that floods every year. They take you to a place that doesn't have, any kind of facilities, and then you're supposed to jubilate. But they want you to watch their land. Well, that's you're doing me more of a favor than I'm doing you more of a favor than you're doing me a favor, right? So free isn't always good, right? Now, everyone should have access to education from the basic school all the way to tertiary, right? And the education should, in order for Ghana's development and Africa's development, right? It was not just about, oh, I'm getting some free education. If you get education which is quality, which is historically and culturally relevant, right? Which is administered in the language in which you understand, and I don't mean the spoken language necessarily, right? The language in which you understand your world outlook, you'll see that you then will take that education and transform the society around you, right? So that free education, or so-called free education, you think is free, but it will really transform society. So it will no longer be free, right? Because you will be paying back to society, and for the next generation and next generation.
Okay, I'm learning a lot today, but Dr. Aturi, let me come to you. So we're not letting you on Zoom there. She says education is a right, which, yes, that's common. It's out there. It's not she, the United Nations, everybody believes that education is a right. But my point is, when somebody has to pay for that right, does the person determine the quality of that right? And when someone is paying for education, how much power does the person have over academic freedom?
Well, in the first place, I agree with Njiba that education is a right. And I would just even go back a little bit on this point to explain why it is a right. I mean, we have chosen to live in societies, countries, communities. But in order to be able to live in these societies and participate meaningfully, and contribute to those societies, the growth of those societies, we need to be educated. And as somebody who also is part of the classics department, I just want us to remember that education is based on the Latin word educere, which means to draw out the qualities that are in people. And for that matter, if we want to build a solid society of young people, and Africa is predominantly made up of young people who can contribute to the future, we need to educate them. That is one. Two, who actually pays for this? The society itself needs educated people, and therefore we should all be paying for it, right? And this means that we really need to invest in education. And sometimes this type of investment is lacking. And when we need, investing in education does not mean sort of like opening the doors and say free education, everybody should go and get a degree. And I think Njiba made that very, very clear. It's not just a question of white-collar jobs, and this is where the coloniality comes in. The institutions that we have in our country and across most of the former colonies were institutions that were created to find administrators to help the colonizers to colonize as well. Therefore, they were training white-collared workers to enter into government to assist the colonial system. We have the term even in Ghana and in most West Africa, oh, he's a graduate, as if it is a social status, right? It's not a social status. Now, what we then need to do is this. We need to transform that form of education so that this education becomes a tool that helps us to develop our societies the way we are. And this is what requires academic freedom and all that. But anyway, let me return to your question about free education. Free education is important. But since we live in societies whereby there are people who can afford and people who cannot afford, we just do not need to roll out, and I'm sorry, maybe I'm being very direct and it may be considered a criticism of government, and this is where academic freedom comes in. I don't think everybody in Ghana deserves free education, free SHS. And I'm going to say it, and I'll repeat it again. Not everybody deserves it. And for that matter, if we're going to roll out policies that
But Dr.
actually...
Ture, sorry, the other side of that is everybody deserves free education. So why doesn't everybody deserve free SHS?
Yeah, some people can't afford it.
Okay.
And since there's not enough money to go around, let those who can afford it pay for it. So that those who cannot afford it will be able to have access. Okay. Because what tends to happen is that if you don't have enough money and you roll out things like that and you can't really sustain it at a high level, then you end up bringing down the quality.
Okay.
And I can assure you that is what we are experiencing at the University of Ghana. We receive people who come in first year and they cannot put together 2 sentences without a grammatical error and put together a paragraph without a logical blunder.
So it's about the quality of where they're coming from.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, the level is very low. And sometimes what we're actually trying to do in the 4 years of, the first degree is almost demanding a miracle to be able to call these people graduates or bachelor's degree holders at the end of 4 years.
Interesting. Let me come back in studio to Ibrahim.
Yeah.
And I just want you to touch on this same thing.
Yeah.
Does the person paying for free education get to call the shots on how free education is?
Yeah, I think to an extent, yes.
Inadvertently, that's government.
Yes, but also because of that, one must appreciate the relationship between the state, and in this case the government, and the citizens. And that is often also what is missing from this conversation. And this is the essence of this conversation, the academic freedom. Because I'm going to disagree with Dr. Ture. And ordinarily, I should not be able to, because he's older, he's more accomplished, among many other things. But in a space like...
academic freedom.
Yes. I should be able to, and that is the essence, in my view, of academic freedom, and the need to have conversation like this. Because I think that often we treat the issue of quality education as mutually exclusive from the ability to make it accessible to all.
Okay.
So if it is a problem of money, one thing that we must also ask ourselves really is that, is it the case that the state does not have the resources to do that? Or is it the case that the state misappropriates the resources in such a way that it doesn't prioritize education? So if education is regarded as important, and as Dr. Freewood mentioned, that it's an inalienable right, then the dedication of state resources ought to go into education in a way that suggests that education is important. But I concede that there's a way that we can also open up the system in ways that make those who can pay. But there's a local context that we need to also appreciate. Because if we run and continue to go the tangent of let those who can pay, those who can't, maybe the state will come in and all of that, the practical application of that, the pragmatic application of that is where oftentimes the problems arise. And that is why we have continuously seen a certain classist, particularly the high school level system, where a group of nation that they had, they are an easier access to some of the best schools, and so that in itself creates a certain class categorizations that in itself ought to be fought against. And so for me, it's a lot more nuanced. But I agree, our politicians don't come to the conversation much the same way that our academics do that, and often it is also influenced by this client-patron relations. And so we're looking at, does this make political sense? Would free SHS get me the votes? Not so much about the altruistic nature of the idea of free education. And for me, that is why, so Dr. Chiro should be able to say this and not have to look behind and see who's watching, or who can call the vice chancellor or the dean in his faculty or college to say that we don't like this guy, this philosophy guy is making a lot of noise or making government unpopular. That is the essence. And much like media freedom, for instance, that's why we need to protect that with everything that we have. Because we're not going to develop if we don't challenge the frontiers of knowledge, if we don't challenge the conventional wisdom that we have. And those things don't come easy. You must step on toes to be able to break the barriers and free yourself in a way that allows you to bring innovation and other things like that for the collective development in our society.
So over time, what we've seen is that,
Okay.
in relation, Dr. Turi, you wanted to respond?
Yeah. Yeah, I just
Right,
wanted
sure.
to different fee ranges
Okay.
according to income. That is possible. And that is being done in many countries. And secondly, another thing that I would like to say is free education does not necessarily, I mean, I received my middle school education in Tamale Secondary School. And incidentally, just to be a little bit more provocative, who are in government or who have been in government in both parties were my schoolmates. Their children are no longer in state schools. Why? What has happened to the state schools? And yet, these schools were good enough to educate us to be able to compete with everybody in the world, and they were free. Now, when we widen the access and we maintain the quality, we can actually ask those who can contribute to contribute. And that way, we don't have to create parallel systems of high-class private schools that then generate an elite that will continue to rule and govern without understanding the conditions of life of the majority of the population.
Are there reasons why the standards have fallen over time? Because when you referred to going to Tamale Secondary School, and back then it was one of the first class public institutions that you could find, producing really good students. But you will not find the same results today. It's not the worst of schools, but the results vary between now and then. Is this a matter of policy? What has created these falling standards in most of the public institutions?
Well, one, it is a question of underinvestment in training. And I mean, this point was mentioned, and this, let me just give you a statistic to put things into context. The African Union leaders met in 2007 and decided that, I mean, African countries should try to step up some and invest more in research and development, investing about 1% of GDP. No single country has achieved it. And in Ghana, the last time I checked, we are even less than 0.5. Now, if you compare this to countries like Korea or Germany, who are on 2 to 3%, then you understand why you cannot walk into a house, even in Ghana, without something made in Korea, right? Because we're using Korea, because they've been investing. But if we are not investing well into our educational system, and yet our numbers keep growing, what do you get? The quality goes down. And then there is a point that you made, I mean, in your questions, which I also will disagree with.
Okay.
You keep insinuating that whoever is paying is government.
Okay.
You know, let us remember something. Government has, I mean, the government or whoever is governing is not my employer. Ghana is a republic. A republic means res publica. Power belongs to the people. We are a sovereign people. So when I say I'm a civil servant, it means I'm a servant of society. The Minister of Education is not my employer, strictly speaking. He's also employed by the people of Ghana. So we are colleagues trying to serve this country. So at the end of the day, the people who call the shots are really our citizens.
So the people are paying.
And therefore, and this is also part of, and this is part of the colonial mentality, where under a colonial system, we are not actually citizens, we are subjects. Yeah. So we are not subjects of government.
Okay.
Government is our service. We actually pay them. The people, or with our taxes and our activities, we pay. So they are only there to administer. Just like I am a civil servant and I'm there in Ghana to work for the education of our kids, and I should be held responsible if I'm doing well to educate our kids. They should also be held responsible if they are administrating our commonwealth well for everybody. So let's get these things straight. Otherwise, sometimes we take up positions and people begin to feel they have power that they don't have.
Interesting. You know, your submission reminds me, there was a time we used to have a lot of academics who were also activists. And when you talk about academic freedom, Dr. Njiba was saying you should be able to contribute to what you're teaching your students. You should be able to, Ibrahim mentioned earlier that you should be able to speak without looking behind you and be able to speak truth to power. What is the relationship between academia and activism?
Well,
especially academic freedom. Does academic freedom become activism?
I'll go back to Chinua Achebe. Chinua Achebe was once asked this, and I mean, in a different context, and talking about African literature, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with Things Fall Apart. At least in the past, everybody used to read it to take their O levels. And Achebe was saying that, look, if you are a writer, a literary writer in this context, you cannot but be engaged. So he was making the comparison. Maybe if you're living somewhere in a different context, you could write, novels and talk about flowers and love and all that. But if you're writing within the African context, you cannot but be engaged because this is our condition. And therefore, we are here to generate knowledge and to teach. Those are the two things we do in the university. We generate knowledge and we teach. But this knowledge has to be engaged. And it has to be useful, not in the immediate sense, but even in a long-term sense. Therefore, we cannot withdraw from society and just become a privileged class of people who are paid to write things that nobody reads.
Right. It's hard to just be a privileged class when you're not comfortable in the very society that you are and you're witnessing all kinds of issues. The other question I have is, the linkage between academic freedom and democracy. But let me come in studio for that. Dr. Njiba, do you want to take that, or should I bounce it to Ibrahim?
Yeah, I can take it. I mean, I think so. So let me also. I want to go back to something, and I hate to kind of be
It's okay.
honing in on this, but I think it's important to note that every person, every citizen in Ghana, every person that comes through this space pays some sort of tax, right?
Okay.
You go. You buy pure water from the sister selling pure water. Be clear, you paid some tax on that 20 pesos or 30 pesos, whatever you've paid. That tax goes into the government, which then fuels and pays for free education, pays for roads, pays for healthcare, pays for whatever. So I think it's important for us to really sort of demystify who is paying for education, right? And not just education, but even all social goods. The cocoa that is exported from this here Ghana does not belong to the government of Ghana. It belongs to the Ghanaian people, right? The cocoa board belongs to the people. The bauxite belongs to the people, the oil, etc. We can keep going. So any profits that come into the government, if I was in the government today, it wouldn't belong to me. It belongs to the Ghanaian people. So we have to think about education from that perspective. So the masses of people should really be dictating the quality and content of education. I think this notion of academic freedom and democracy is a really important point, right? Yeah. Because again, I'm going to go back to what is democracy? Is democracy a Western analysis of democracy with two-party states that trade off elections every 4 years, every 6 years, every years? Is that what democracy is? Or is democracy a system in which the people contribute to the running of their society, right? And if that's the case, I'm sorry to go here, but if that's the case, it means that the people also control their labor. They also have a relationship to the mode of production, what is produced and how it's produced, and that includes education, right? And so when we're thinking about democracy, let's ask ourselves, are we living truly in a democratic state, or are we living in a state that there's a facade of democracy because the West has told us that this is what democracy is? But is it truly democracy if the average person cannot talk about their labor, cannot talk about how much they should be paid, cannot talk about where the bauxite goes, cannot have any role or responsibility in negotiating what profits we get and what profits we get out. And also they can't talk about access to free education and what the curriculum is. For example, let's go to a small community in Wa, right? Maybe education there, that education, they need industrialization perhaps, right? That may be what they need. Why don't we ask the community what they need before determining what's needed? Now you go to Kumasi, for example, or you come to Accra, a community here. Maybe industrialization is not what the type of education that community needs. Maybe that community needs another type of education. The problem with democracy and academic freedom is that we do not have any conversations with the people who are affected the most with the education, the curriculum and features of education. And that's from straight basic all the way up to university education.
Yeah. And, if I could just make a very quick point on the nexus between academic freedom and democracy. I mean, if you look at the history of universities across the world, and particularly if you come back home to Ghana, what you would notice very clearly is that at some point in our lives, we had universities being the centers of activism. We've seen the likes where, I mean, what we know today to be, or historically to be, the Commonwealth Hall, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah himself was barred from entering the University of Ghana campus for very many reasons. And so universities have historically been the place, the hotbeds for ideas, for vibrancy, for energetic thinking, among many other things like that. But quite unfortunately, these days we don't seem to be seeing that anymore. Our National Union of Ghana Students, for instance, has essentially become a poodle for political parties to run them around. That is also largely because the bigger society has failed in creating opportunities for young people. And so by that, we have used the very scarce opportunities that are available to almost essentially render them mute. So if you want to survive after going through school and all of that, you must be someone's boogie boy, hold their bags here and there, and then you are able to get something. So every problem that we see in our country today is tied one way or the other to what happens in our university communities. And it is very important and in our interests, all of us collectively, that we would make sure that academic freedom continues to be at the top there, and should be one of those things that nobody touches. Media freedom is one of them. I work as a journalist myself, and it's very important. And I'm sure you can also even speak to this even better. So all of these things are integrated one way or the other, and we must never lose sight of that, because they define the true essence of what our society is and what it ought to be.
Can I just come in?
Yes, you can come in. Because it's Academic Freedom Day.
You see, now that I'm thinking about this, I also want us to think about this question of not just the features and curriculum and academic freedom, but how many students are in a classroom, right?
Yeah.
That dictates whether you're a critical thinker or not.
Yeah.
Let's just say this. The international standard, I think, is 1 faculty to 13 students, right? With the University of Ghana, we've got 60,000 students. We got about 1,200 plus faculty. Clearly, that's not our ratio, right? So how am I, a faculty member, supposed to teach a student to be a critical thinker when I got 500 students?
Yeah.
It's not going to happen,
Yeah.
right?
There's already a disconnect.
There's a disconnect. Well, you know what? And this also goes to academic freedom. She's an off-campus student. We have class because we're now an online platform for our UGRC, right? Yeah. Sometimes I don't have credits to get on the Zoom call. I don't think she's lying. Which is very quiet, and a couple of the young women who are living in my house have been attacked. So I'm afraid to go home at night, right? So all of these. So now, what do you tell a student? Well, good luck with that. There has to be some access for students to be successful, right? In their educational pursuit. Because this is the students that we're teaching today. There are next generation of leaders in Ghana. There are presidents. There are MPs. There are next generation of lecturers, our doctors. When you have a heart attack, I don't want anyone to have a heart attack, but when you have a heart attack, they're going to be operating on you, right? But if they can't study, they don't know what the heart looks like, they can't operate on you. So it's not just about being able to say whatever you want to say. It's about having conditions which allow you to think, which allow students to think, which allow students to sit in a space which is comfortable, and they can have that kind of collective understanding and thinking about the problems that we have. Nowadays, you're thinking about jumping on a trotro, riding across town, making sure you get in before dark so nobody attacks you on the way, right? And then now, how do I get onto my class? And so academic freedom, in my opinion, and I think in many of the collective's opinion, is everything from being able to speak freely to the conditions in which the students are part of this
that's
process.
quite a range. But Dr. Ture, we're almost out of time, so I just want you to quickly touch on, let's bring it all together. Academic freedom and the African University, specific reference to the University of Ghana, and how it seeks to tackle these issues in higher education in Ghana. With some reference to the event.
Right. Well, what we're trying to do is really to trigger a conversation, and the conversation is this. We in Ghana have universities, we have our public universities.
Okay.
These universities, at the end of the day, as has been said, are being maintained or even, financially by the people of Ghana.
Okay.
We have a group of lecturers, and a university is a community made up of the academic staff, the administrative staff, and the students. This community called a university wants to make a deep impact to improve the life of Ghanaians. What are the conditions that are necessary? We need to be able to think, we need to be able to explore ideas freely, and we need to have the conditions of life and service to be able to do so. Because the future of our country lies in the hands of these young people who are going through these institutions. And until these institutions are free to do what they exist for, they will not be able to serve our country. And we should really, one, be free from external conditions that try to manipulate or limit our actions or condition them to make them ineffective, and also be free to propose, because freedom is not only freedom from, but it's also freedom to. And we want to assume that freedom to do something as well, not only freedom from, but freedom to. And we want to start this conversation in these meetings that we'll be holding throughout the month of August, three different sessions, so that we can actually engage with students, with policymakers, within ourselves, to see how we can make a better contribution.
See, so I'll just take some last words from Ibrahim also. And when is the next one?
So the next tomorrow, actually the first one, which will tomorrow is 11th, and it will be happening at the Great Hall at the University of Ghana. And then the next week, which will be on the 19th, would also happen at the Great Hall, University of Ghana. And the final one in the 3 series would be on the 25th of August 2022, also at the